Okay, next let's go to our model folder and let's press Command N, and I'm going to look for data, so data model, and we want to keep track of our high score. So I'm going to call this high scores. Let's call this high scores data model, and I'm going to copy this. This is very important to copy this. We can always copy it again. And now let's go down to the bottom of the screen where you see Add Entity. Now click on the plus sign. So I'm going to add an entity. Now up here I'm going to, under the word entities and above the word fetch request, so entity, I'm going to change this to high score entity. Now, we can think of this kind of like a struct high score entity or high score model. I prefer calling it entity in this context. And now we're going to add attributes. Okay, so we have this plus sign over here. So one attribute is the name of the person that got a high score. And let's change the type. Click on undefined and go down to string. So you can think of it like a struct that has a name of type string. And I'd like to have a score. So I'm going to call this attribute score. Click on undefined and look for integer 64. And that's pretty much it. We have our high score data model. And we'd like to be able to add new high scores, delete old high scores, maybe update the name of the player that got a certain score. So next, let's click on the View Models folder. Let's do Command N, and I'd like a Swift file, not a SwiftUI view, a Swift file, and we're going to create our high score view model over here. So next, I'm going to call this high score view model. Now let's clean things up. So I'm going to call this class high score view model, and it inherits from observable object. We're going to want to observe the changes in this class. And our database, I'm going to think of it as a container of type NS persistent container. So we're going to have to initialize that. And in addition, we're going to want to have some high scores that our view is going to watch for changes. So for that, we need published var high scores. So this will be all of our high scores. Now, when we created our data model, we had something called high score entity, right? Which consists of a name attribute and a score attribute. I think of it as a field, but it's referred to as an attribute. Now, notice that Xcode is really upset, right? Because we need to do two things. First of all, cannot find NS persistent container in scope. Well, that's an easy fix, right? We need to import core data. So let's import core data. Import core data. And our class has no initializers. So let's initialize. So init. And let's initialize our container to be equal to NS persistent controller name. Now earlier I said we have to save the name of high scores data model. And I need this right here. Okay, so we have the name is high scores data model. That gives us access to our database. So we're going to do this in two steps. We want to load the data, but it won't really be in the high scores yet. So in addition, fetch data into high scores. These are the two steps that we want to implement. So let's start with loading the data. Now, before I continue, let's really initialize the high scores to an empty array. And now for load the data, let's set container. And I want to apply load persistent stores. And we have a completion handler here. So let's just remove this. And we can type description, comma, error in. And if let error. So if there is an error, then print, loading error. So error and localized description. So we'll have a description. This error could occur, say, if we ran out of memory, or if I mistyped high scores data model. Okay, that caused an error. Otherwise, loading successful. Okay, so that's the first part. Fetching the data involves a little bit work, so I think it's best to put this off till next time, okay? So at least we'll have the structure. So I want a function down here. Fetch high scores. Takes no parameters, no return type. And yeah, let's just leave it like this for now. So fetch high scores. And let's set this to-do comment, right, that we need to complete this later. Great, so have an amazing day and see you next time.